Hello YouTubers! In this video I will present a completely new mathematical method for ballistic problem to derive a projectile trajectory path in the non-restricted airspace without any guidance ramp, wire or liquid surface tension in the case of fountain stream, and under ideal conditions without any air resistance. Before deriving a proper new equation, we must show what is wrong with the new theory, which leads to a wrong result. But even before that, we must show why we need a parametric mathematical equation describing motion in the first place. Here will be presented the simplest example, which will be later adapted for ballistics. For example, train on a map thus goes under steady speed with 0 and under constant angle theta with x-axis. On the map that has Cartesian coordinates x and y. Velocity vectors at the x-axis and y-axis are: first, coordinates change of a train motion are the product rule of the velocity vectors over time change. To find the train motion trajectory path, first we need to express time t from the x-coordinate. Insert the time t expression into the y-coordinate and we get the train motion equation. The purpose of this video is to get a math equation that is independent of a time variable t and depends only the variable x, or vice versa, x from a variable of y. In our case, we can conclude that a tangent line with a steady angle theta constant is a first-degree linear equation. The new curve will be not a parabola, but a similar polynomial that will be parabolish in the shape. I have spent 28 years studying ballistic trajectory paths, and there exist many examples where energy conservation effect is clear, but a path that takes a physical process is unclear. For example, the shock diamond shape of an afterburner when exhaust gas leaves a nozzle in a rocket or for supersonic jet engines. The diamond shape translated into math language is two cones connected side by side at the bottom, but we are not sure what it is 100% double-sided conical shape. What we observe with a naked eye may not be exactly accurate. Scientists determined this probably experimentally by observing that silent zones where diamond shapes are not found. The distance from the nozzle to the first shock diamond can be approximated by such distance equation. Here, d0 is Laval nozzle diameter, P1 is pressure inside nozzle, P0 atmosphere pressure. We can see that this derivation of a ballistic parameter curve is purely mathematical curiosity, but it also has real-life application in various fields. Please be very patient. I have spent 28 years studying not just this but many science fields to find a correct solution. Plot showing velocity vectors on the projectile trajectory curve. To reject the present theory, first we must derive the existing equation thoroughly before criticizing it. We must show full derivation, show instances where the theory is wrong, and in some instances where the present theory matches with newly derived theory. A projectile is fired with the initial velocity v0 at an initial angle theta 0 with x-axis. Based on the expression of Newton's second law of motion, force F equals ma, we will solve a second-order differential equation system for the force vector terms fx and fy. Here a x equals 0, acceleration projection in the x-axis is always equals to 0, according present theory, because for the entire flight time this coordinate term is always perpendicular to the y-axis. On the other hand, force term Fy at the y-axis has a negative sign because the acceleration force of the Earth's gravity is always pointing downwards parallel to the y-axis. And g is a free-fall acceleration constant. At the initial time t equals 0, at the origin point on the Cartesian coordinate system 0, 0, the magnitudes of the velocity vector terms Vx and Vy are. After multiplying the system of equation by 1 divided by m mass and dt and multiplying by dt, we integrate it with respect to dt, dx and dy. As a result, we obtain the differential equation system of the velocity vector terms. Here, constants c1 and c2 are integration constants of velocity of indefinite integrals. First, final equation system of velocity terms looks like that. After multiplying the system of equations of velocity terms by dt, we integrate it a second time with respect to dx, dy, and dt. As a result, we obtain the system of equation for the projectile coordinates x and y with respect to the time variable t in equations. The law of ballistics must be independent of the time variable t. So from the variable x in the system of equation of distant coordinate from the x distant term, we express time t. Insert t expression into the equation y, and the final result is the parametric equation from x variable of a projectile path in non-restricted space. The resulting path of a projectile is a negative sign quadratic equation, which itself is an inverted parabola defined by a parametric formula of such. The problem with this particular equation is that the initial angle is always constant value theta 0 equals constant, which is not true in reality. We see that in the diagram at the first point the angle on the curve makes a different angle theta than was initially at the beginning. And at each point resultant velocity v and the angle theta describing the direction of a velocity vector in the air are variable terms. The minimum velocity vector v equals w becomes at the highest second point h, where the angle of a velocity vector v equals w becomes parallel to the x-axis. Point 1 is asymmetrical about the x-axis and numerical equal to this point. The direction of velocity coincides with the direction of the gravity vector, and the angle increases from theta to theta 0 along the curve. The biggest criticism is that along the way of a projectile path, initial angle of velocity does not change. In coefficients, we have trigonometric function boundary condition for cases projectile projected perpendicular to y-axis, and in our case projected parallel to the axis R. Only experimental observation can say if this equation is true, but physics methodology in theoretical physics also say that theoretical physics is cheap. It is math with pencil and paper, with the help of calculator or laptop, and your derived equation on paper must satisfy the boundary condition. The third issue is that we don't know what velocity of a Vx term is at the highest peak of a curve, where a resultant vector v is parallel to the x-axis. we only know fact in the present theory that Vy equals 0 terms at this point is equal to 0. Survival bias is the logical error of concentrating on entities that passed a selection process while overlooking those that did not. Why was nobody tried to correct the obviously wrong theory? Because something is correct about that theory, or equation contains conclusions that match experimental evidence. In logic do not exist half or one-third truth. In my opinion, one-third of a parabola equation is correct. That is premise of systematic errors that sometimes occur in physics. For example, in fluid dynamics exist laminar and turbulent flow regimes. For practical reasons, such distinction is not required, but the equation for pressure loss for slow laminar flow is correct. From such an obvious fact, we can try maybe find an equation for a more rapid turbulent flow. In the current theory, in the diagram shown here, the maximum height h at which the projectile will reach is calculated with the condition that velocity Vy equals 0 at height h. The time t to reach height y equals h expressed from equation velocity. The expression of time t we insert in the y-axis coordinate distance equation under the notation y equals h. Here y0 is maximum height at initial angle 90 degrees. This equation for the calculation of the maximum height or peak of a negative sine parallel path curve will be correct, and under new theory, whose derivation methods are completely different from those shown here. Present theory lacks a solution for the remaining velocity Vx at the height peak point h. Maximum distance at which the projectile can fly is solved from the quadratic equation under the condition y equals 0. This equation has two solutions. At x equals 0, that is initial point at time t 0. Other point is at distance x equals L. And by solving this equation, we get the projectile flight distance L is equal to maximum distance at is under the condition that the double angle of sine function is equal to 1. Solution to maximum is wrong. The angle 45 degrees at which the projectile reaches maximum distance is actually wrong, but technically it will be close enough to be correct. Another correct fact about the present theory is time of fall on the object in horizontal and vertical position is identical. A reference to this video and link to our sources are in the YouTube description section of this video, and this fact of equal time is too obvious to prove, but it will be a crucial fact that will allow us to derive an alternative solution. And in the general case, close enough facts or even a correct equation give a survival bias notion, which does not allow seeking alternative methods. Our starting point will be here at point 2, where the angle of resultant velocity is at 0 angle. One of the methods to calculate resultant velocity is to apply Pythagoras theorem for right triangle. To obtain the projectile motion equation, we apply the reverse engineering method to our physics problem. The reverse engineering method is used in the manufacturing sector to disassemble a mechanisms and to trace every element that makes fully assembled device and every component connection to each other. Our problem, we don't know what velocity w at the height h is. Our approach to solving physics problem is to say that we know the initial velocity w at point h parallel to the x-axis. Our task will be calculate the maximum velocity v0 and the angle theta 0 at which the projectile hits the ground, and finally flight distance x0. When we reverse engineer our physics problem, and we'll say that if a projectile is fired with initial velocity v0 at angle theta 0, it will be reach height h at remaining velocity w and will travel distance x0. Such a reverse engineering method can be applied based on the fact that potential energy quantity depends only on altitude height h. This is a very condensed info, but this fact is important because the path/trajectory of a projectile does not change the energy conservation condition between potential and kinetic energy. This fact came from the time calculation of a rolling ball from the ramp with a specific geometric path from height h. Here and there ramp shape of or parabolic quadratic trajectory path of a projectile in an unrestricted air does not change the energy quantity, which only depends on altitude height h. Previously, we established that the falling time t is identical in both cases and was derived from second Newton's law of motion in regards of y-axis at the time t equals 0. Falling distance is equal to twice time t at which the projectile will hit the ground from height h is equal to. Insert y function of height change from time into velocity equation v y, and we can express velocity change from height change. From that we can express the resultant velocity equation v, which is an extra equation to Pythagoras theorem for a right triangle for adding velocities at x-axis and y-axis. From the range of change dependency at height h on the ground, we can calculate velocity v0. We solve the velocity at which the projectile hits the ground on x-axis. Thus, we solve one of the three unknown values from the total. The angle theta 0 at which the projectile hits the ground and the maximum flight distance x0 are still unknown terms. Our main goal is to find the time-independent projectile motion equation from the variable y. First, we must get the velocity term at the x-axis, reverse engineer our resultant velocity for range change from variable y. It will be, by knowing we can write an energy conservation for our physics problem. This is true because potential energy is independent of flight trajectory path and only depends from the height difference h. This energy conservation condition sustains boundary condition at limit height h approaching 0 and velocity w approaching 0. On the other hand, it does not provide any further info about the relation between potential and kinetic energy, which both are in mutual relation. That is because we have a multi-variable calculus physics problem, where at the start we solve flight distance change from y variable. Later we substituted the distance variable with the time variable t. That is much better, but it is not very informative because time is a subjective measurement unit connected to clocks, and golden rule of philosophy says that clocks do not define time as philosophical concept, but only measure arbitrary event duration at very steady pace. Steady pace is by defining how clocks are well made. It defines the quality of a clock device, but not time itself. We need a transcendental measurement unit of time that is outside of physics measurement system, and that is angle theta, which is defined by transcendental math constant pi and is a dimensional unit contrary to the time measurement unit, which is measured in time units seconds. Our task is to get the velocity term differential equation system and solve it. From a previous chapter, we established that velocity can be defined in two ways. Here, resultant velocity v is solved classically using Pythagoras theorem for a right triangle to solve the velocity vector value as the hypotenuse, and the second method is based on the energy conservation condition by adding two velocity terms. From the equation system, we can express the velocity term on the x-axis. We have velocity term differential equation from the time change. Next step is to get distance term x and y by integrating velocity terms from time dt. To solve, integration constant c1 and c2 is by applying the initial condition to our scheme. At moment t equals 0, projectile location is at x equals 0. Thus, integration constant c1 is equal to integration constant c2 is solved under the initial condition at moment t equals 0. Projectile location is at maximum height h here. After time t, projectile hits the ground at location y equals 0 here. Thus, result of integration constant c2 is equal to h. Therefore, distance equation system from the variable time has such a final expression. From the y distance term, we can express the time variable t and insert this expression into the x distance function and get the projectile motion equation from the y variable. From a distance range, we can solve the maximum distance x0 at point y0. We see that maximum height distance x0 is a function of initial velocity y and height h. To get the projectile motion equation, we need to reverse engineer our derived projectile equation from a parallel position into the required position, that is projection of a projectile from the ground position at moment t equals 0, at initial position x equals 0, and y0 shown here. To reverse engineer a physics problems, we will use previously derived equations. Except range will also be in reverse order of such function. Thus, newly derived projectile motion equation is, except in reverse order, when the y variable change range is from 0 till h, the x result change range is from 0 to x0. Thus, we have a minus sign in front of the y function. And when the y variable change range is from h till 0, and x result change is from 0 till L, thus we have plus sign in front of a y function. This method is not very convenient, but the physics problem was solved in the reverse order. Thus, depiction of a curve graph uses the same approach. That is very important moment, which does not exist in present theory, is to solve resultant velocity angle change from distance y or time t variable change. To solve the angle, first we need to know such trigonometric identities. First, we find the derivative of a projectile motion equation from dy change. Derivative result of cotangent insert into this identity, and a result of the angle change theta as function of y is. Okay, this is not very neat and beautiful math expression, and it has three y variables inside the tangent function. So based solely on this fact, we can say that the projectile motion path is not a straight tangent line. The main reason for the revision of all parabolic curve projectile motion is that the angle is a constant over entire projectile motion path, which is not true. At point y equals 0, we have an initial angle theta 0 of a projectile projection with the x-axis. Thus, the initial angle is defined by such expression. From this equation, we can express the maximum height h from the initial angle value by converting our tangent function into a tangent function. Square this equality and raise this equality by -1 power, and we get such a new equality. After more substitutions, final equation looks like that. So, we derive the maximum height equation from the initial angle perspective, which is an exact expression as in the present theory, but derivation method is very different. I want to show the origin of gravity at the end of this presentation, but this maximum height expression is just a half of the energy conservation condition from the initial angle value perspectives. This equation of absolute value of n is equal to 1 is related to the philosophy of reality called mathematical formalism, where a building block of reality is math, which will be discussed at the end of this video. Just because over 28 years of investigation, many facts will be dismissed in this very long video essay, but just food for thought, Pythagoras' equation for a right triangle is equality. But Pythagoras' trigonometric equation for a right triangle is identity. So energy conservation condition in absolute value equal 1 is fundamental identity 2. Now we can return to our previous ballistic problem and solve a final unknown value, an angle theta 0 at which projectile hits the ground. Angle theta 0 equation expressed from height equation, and it is from here we can derive angle theta 0 as a function of initial velocity w and maximum height h. The inverse arcsine function we convert into sine function. Additionally, we expand velocity vh, which is the composite velocity of two terms. We can return to a standard ballistic problem to solve velocity w at maximum height h as a function of initial angle and initial velocity. This is most important equation from all equations. not because it is not existing equation in the present theory, but because it raises a question about how the cause and effect principle works for the gravitational force field. A cause and effect relation is a foundation not just in physics, but also the foundation of all science. In our case, we must raise a question about how a projectile at the initial point 0, 0 projected with initial velocity v0 at initial angle theta 0, not violating the energy conservation condition at maximum height h, with the remaining velocity w and angle theta equal to 0 degrees. My philosophical approach to this problem is a mathematical formalism, which is based on the premise that at initial point 0, 0, let's say the point 0 with initial angle theta 0 and initial velocity v0 defines velocity w at point h at angle theta 0. That is weird. Our derived tangent function defines the vector angle of velocity slash acceleration slash force at an exact point, and that is obvious that the cause and effect principle was not violated. But in our case, this velocity violates the principle of present and future. Initial point 0 instantly knows information about maximum destination at point h. My wild guess is that all information is saved inside the sine-cosine function. That is where the location for the cause and effect principle is located. A sine wave function is a building block for a gravity force field. Thus, maximum absolute energy value of equal to 1 is encoded in the trigonometric function of sine. We can see that sine function holds the free-fall constant g. That is not rigid proof, but is much more convincing than naive thought that a ball or project or any kind of object in unrestricted flight in the Earth gravity field has an internal counter that counts potential and kinetic energy values, and when ball reaches the required height, let's say h, it stops climbing altitude because it violates the energy conservation condition. Alternatively, we can think that there exists some mysterious external control that measures every object on Earth kinetic and potential energy values, and if an object violates this fundamental law, it will be severely punished. That is philosophical question. The energy conservation cannot be violated in any circumstances, but we also must explain the mechanism by which it is never violated. In quantum mechanics already exists a theory that all matter slash energy are waves, but in the case of a gravitational force, it is a static force, and sine function measures static velocity w at exact point h. From the perspective of no restriction exists to apply the trigonometric function to static physics problems. In hindsight, we can replace monstrosity tangent function with the sine function. Except this equation does not violate cause and effect principle and measures the vector arrow angle at an instant location that is at point y and x. Also, this equation will be important at the end of the essay when we talk about the origin of a gravitational force, or more precisely about a free fall acceleration constant g. In physics, acceleration is not sustained quantity conservation, which is 100% fact, proven multiple times. But constant g is an exception from the rule, responsible for potential and energy conservation. Thus, it must sustain quantity conservation condition too. Just the reminder that in present theory, angle is 45 degrees at which the projectile flies maximum distance. Compared to the new theory, distance is wrong, but angle is close enough to correct or not so far away from the 45-degree value. In the new theory, first step is the x0 equation right in the domain of a maximum height h. For the projectile distance equation in the maximum height h domain, we have 5 h values, for which when 2 h values increasing in value, distance value h0 decreasing in distance. And for 3 remaining h values, they increasing in value, resulting distance increasing too. That is definite sign that the distance equation has an optimization solution, which can be found by applying Fermat's least action principle, by finding the derivative of a distance equation and later equating it to 0. We can substitute equation above further. Expression of the height equation from this monstrosity above is equal to, insert h value into a distance h0 value and we get maximum distance equation. We found the solution maximum distance, but as previously stated, all ballistic motion is a multivariable calculus problem solved from the initial angle perspective. To find the angle at which the maximum distance condition is satisfied, we must insert h value into the arcsine function, and the result is 41 degrees. I explain why this value is not so far from 45 in more details in the upcoming chapter, except our approach to find a solution was very different compared to the parabola equation in present theory. The next chapter will be a bit of tangent, no pun intended, but it explains the math behind constant alpha, beta, and angle 41 degrees. This chapter is a pure math with zero physics involved, very in sync with the Summer of Math theme where the physics science branch is allowed to participate if and only if it involves math. We can see that maximum distance in projectile flight is independent of freefall acceleration constant g. It means constant alpha, beta, and angle of 41 degrees are fundamental math constants outside the physics realm. These constants are like pi or e, which appear in physics but are external constants that belong to pure math. On alternative Earth with different g values, or on Mars, Venus, angle 41 degrees will be the same to reach a maximum distance. In the sphere of math, we will investigate them in more details. First, alpha has a such expression directly expressed from derived formula. Beta constant expressed from the x0 equation is a collection of monstrosities of equations. Nothing special about them except alpha and beta are real numbers and belong to the irrational numbers domain, same as pi and e, but it's are not transcendental mathematical constants like pi or e. Thus, both constants can be expressed in algebraic form. This, of course, was obtained via math software, or more precise with the help of Wolfram Alpha site, which after writing a formula with a simplified request, it generated this two-cubic equation, which one solution solved the alpha and beta constants. Maybe a history reference that i.e. artificial intelligence appeared about 2023 for wider public, and Wolfram Alpha already existed more than a few years. It is language model for math because of math operations. I mean, not just numerical but symbolic math operations have very precise rules for how a language is constructed. But it has the same problem as usual artificial intelligence. It does not explain why exactly this cubic equation solves our problem. So my explanation will be in the domain of numerology, not number theory. First, both equations are cubic with binary constant numbers. We can speculate that maybe gravity is related to quantum mechanics, where the interaction of fields and particles is dominated by discrete math. We used an integration method. First, it means gravity field is uniform without discrete jumps or gaps in force field. But probably that both cubic equations will be binary numbers are rare, and we cannot sweep this fact under the rug and ignore. We also cannot ignore numerology's significance to physics development. Balmer's theory describing the spectral line emission of a hydrogen atom is. Johann Balmer was a Swiss math teacher and amateur in the physics realm. Opened the door to quantum mechanics by guessing a formula to explain the hydrogen spectrum lines. Even Planck, who coined quanta, so discrete number in mathematical terms, used discrete math that it would be only temporary method to explain the weird behavior of black body radiation. Later, he expected it would be corrected for a continuous spectrum, so his prediction was pure numerology, guessing of number patterns to explain physics phenomena that did not follow classical mechanics rules. The most famous numerology in physics is free fall acceleration constant, which is approximately pi squared. Of course, 1/40 millionth of the Earth's circumference is the original definition of a meter, and the Greek word geometry means measure of Earth. But in numerology, we also must not rule out that is just a lucky coincidence. The 41 degree is related to rainbow formation at maximum 42 degrees, which is an average value between 40 and 42. According to Wikipedia, the base of a cone forms a cycle at an angle of 40 to 42 degrees. From the plot, we see that ballistic trajectory curve as a function of height h has two height points, h1 and h2, at which we share the same flight distance x0. We have one unique point at an angle of 41 degrees. This line divides the curve into two halves. On top of the curve, angle range is between 90 degrees and 41 degrees, and on the bottom we have an angle range between 0 and 41 degrees. Present theory has 45 degrees at which the projectile flies maximum distance x0. If we compare 45 to 41 degrees in our case, this difference is so negligible that in real case scenario, which air resistant in experiments, you cannot see a difference. But our case is mathematical investigation of ballistic trajectory with deeper insight into the origin of gravitational force, not just plain establishment of angle which gives a maximum distance result. Newly derived equations have zero application in ballistics because air resistance is proportional to velocity squared, and shells and bullets fly at supersonic speeds, faster than speed of sound in the air, compared to human capabilities to throw or swing at initial speed v0. Supersonic means very, very fast compared to humans. Additionally, in normal circumstances, terrain is never flat in the x-axis direction, and even Earth's curvature at more than 5 km distance has a significant factor to fly distance L, so it has zero application in military. However, in professional sport exists javelin training mechanism whose purpose is to strengthen muscles in the action of a javelin throwing, but also to create a muscle memory in the body at exact 45 degrees. Thus, javelin throwing, disc throwing, hammer swinging, and long jump where initial angle theta of 45 degrees is important to increase the result at the same strength level. Here is shown a numerical example of projectile thrown with initial velocity v0 equals 30 meters per second velocity at angle of 85 degrees shown here, which shares the same distance L1 as the projectile thrown at 3.4 degrees shown here. Next region will share the same distance L2 are at 60 degrees shown here, and at 23.2 degrees shown here. The unique maximum distance region is at 41 degrees shown here. What degree of power is the new ballistic trajectory curve? The answer is 3/4 power degree from y variable perspectives, or more conventional notation from x variable is compared to second degree parabola. Our curve is 4/3 power degree from x variable perspective. In the present retroduce is an inverted parabola curve, which itself is quadratic function. Parabola is more smoother, more roundish, non-linear function than 4/3 power degree newly derived equation. That is very obvious at the steep angles. For example, at 85 degrees, where a curve closely resembles an isosceles triangle. At higher velocity, at peak height h, we can see that curve starts to resemble a parabolish looking curve here shown at 23.2 degrees. Energy conservation condition for the 60-degree curve is, that is obvious, that if the ball reaches the maximum height 3/4 from the maximum height possible, rest of energy must be stored in kinetic energy or velocity term, which is 1/4 from the total energy absolute value. From the energy conservation condition equation, we can derive velocity W at peak height h, which is alternative equation to the initial equation from the angle. I am convinced that new theory is right based on this energy conservation condition. I can be biased and wrong, but something is so fundamental in this equation that it cannot be just coincidence or a fluke when the results randomly match. This last chapter is some speculation about the gravitational force from a classical mechanics perspective. It is not related to quantum mechanics or quantum gravity or general relativity. First, we will write second Newton's law of motion for newly derived ballistic equation. From physics, we know that acceleration is velocity derivatives per time, thus the acceleration term in the x-axis direction is. Therefore, second Newton's law of motion for a newly derived ballistic equation is. This equation is more symbolic because present equation was solved from second Newton's law of motion. The problem is that velocity sustains energy conservation condition, which was my approach. Acceleration does not sustain quantity conservation condition. That is not right, considering the gravitational force in the form of free fall acceleration constant g. But first, we need to explain two types of acceleration. one of which is internal acceleration, which does not sustain quantity conservation condition, and R is external acceleration, which is gravitational force for free fall acceleration constant g, which sustains quantity conservation condition. For example of internal acceleration is such. Let's say we have a cannon barrel length of 1 meter, a projectile of mass m and at initial angle theta 0 in 1 meter cannon from time t and initial velocity v0 release out of cannon with a velocity of 30 meters per second speed. The time spent in the cannon barrel is equal to the internal acceleration of projectile with the mass m when it shoots out of 1 meter long barrel is equal to 900 meters per second squared. We have another cannon with a 10 times shorter barrel. Only instead of compressed air gunpowder is used to fire a projectile of same mass m at the same initial angle and, most important, at same initial velocity with 0 equals 30 meters per second. The acceleration of a cannon with a 10 times shorter barrel is 100 times higher than previously, and the only important value is initial velocity v0, which sustains the energy quantity conservation condition. That is type of internal acceleration produced by some internal action. It can be human for cannon, it can be animals, it can be inanimate nature. For example, volcano crater spewing rocks due to vapor steam produced by hot lava, river flow deceleration, etc. Later we will see the right equation. This does not matter at all for gravitational force, or better word, the gravitational force is our surroundings, a backward potential force which is always present. It will be proven that internal acceleration acquired in the barrel does not affect the motion of a projectile in a unrestricted space under influence of the Earth's gravitational force in the form of free fall acceleration constant g. Speedrun derivation of acceleration in the x-axis direction. Is this not amazing result? Acceleration in the x-axis direction is independent of time variable t, variable y, maximum height h, and also independent of velocity v0, vh, or w. Our acceleration is variable from only one variable angle theta change. That makes sense because gravity is a background force, and in our case at time t0 gravity force according to both the equation of second Newton law of motion from the time variable and angle variable is equal to the same value g constant. The boundary condition is when the initial angle is 90 degrees to the x-axis. The result is undefined condition 0 divided by 0. This angle can be solved by applying L'Hopital rule manually shown here, or by using any kind of math software or app. Result 0 acceleration says that no motion in the x-axis direction occurs. The ball falls perpendicular to the ground from the height h only in y-axis direction. Finally, the resultant acceleration of gravity force is at peak height h, resultant acceleration is always square root of g. Word always is very important because no matter what internal acceleration was at moment t equals 0, the projectile motion is always in the presence of a gravity force field. Gravity force field is always a background medium in which all living or inanimate objects are surrounded. The gravitational force effect cannot be cancelled or manipulated, increased or decreased. The gravitational force can only be overcome by doing internal work, flapping wings for birds, jumping, lifting things, manufacturing helium balloons, or using our jet or propeller-driven thrust devices. I'm not sure if the result square root 2 is right, but I am 100% sure that the result that came from my newly derived equation is right. If a gravitational force was a variable of internal acceleration, it would violate the energy conservation condition for the potential energy. Mass m sustained quantity conservation condition. This fact was known before Leibniz, Descartes, or Newton, who proved that momentum in energy sustains quantity conservation condition. Height h sustained quantity conservation condition. Space at no long distances according to Euclid is made of a straight line grid and also cannot be manipulated. At higher distances in the scale of a solar system, it is non-Euclidean space, which is basis of general relativity theory, who explain the gravitational force in non-classical mechanics terms. If energy sustains the energy conservation and two scalars also sustain quantity conservation condition, it means free fall acceleration scalar g also must sustain quantity conservation condition and must be independent from other variables like mass, height, time, velocity, and of course independent from internal acceleration. Constant g at very high height, more than 100 kilometers, starts will feel the impact of Newton's law of gravity, which is proportional to the inverse distance squared. In experiment condition, air resistance has much bigger impact on flight distance than Earth geometry. Most interesting that resultant force is independent from initial velocity with zero value. And that is right, because mass, space as height, distance, and free fall acceleration are independent from each other. Thus, velocity, which sustains also quantity conservation condition, is in a kinetic energy term and is independent term like rest of the metrics. Equation for ax and resulting acceleration makes a lot of sense, where only vector angle in flight defines resultant acceleration. Thus, we can write second Newton's law of motion from an angle change perspectives, which will be fundamental absolute value definition of gravitational force field. This equation is not practical because we cannot find velocity w or vh, thus get initial velocity v0, because it is time independent force equation, where the original second Newton law of motion is a second order differential equation per time change. That is my speculation that the origin of gravity is hidden inside transcendental trigonometric function of sine and cosine via dimensionless variable theta to a uniform density ball or disk rolling from an inclined ramp. I skipped a lot of information related restricted object motion because this video is already too long. My prediction is that the theory is good, but I am human, so I can be biased and can be wrong, because these trigonometric functions are not periodic but static, where, for example, electromagnetic waves are always periodic. In our case, it shows resultant acceleration at a particular point, and the maximum angle can be in the range from 0 to 90 degrees. Thus, a non-periodic change of angle. In the sense of quantum mechanics, gravity is not periodic, so applying the wave function in the Schrödinger equation is not possible. However, gravity is somehow related to trig function are not surprising either. Gravity force field can be somehow related to quantum gravity in the form of waves. We cannot rule out this possibility either. The final touch to the theory is to show that the derived equation of force and acceleration satisfies the boundary condition, case where we get undefined condition 0 divided by c of projectile falling/climbing perpendicular to the ground. Resultant force cannot be equal to 0, which is a violation of the rule that the gravity force field is a background meaning always present in action by pushing down matter in the opposite direction of y-axis coordinate system arrow. That is all, folks. Thanks for